This is chapter 3, verses 122 to 124. And Allah certainly helped you at Badr when you were weak. So keep your duty to Allah that He may. So keep your duty to Allah that you may give thanks. When you said to the believers, does it not suffice you that your Lord should help you with 3,000 angels sent down? Yea, if you are steadfast and you keep your duty, and they come upon you in a headlong manner, your Lord will assist you with 5,000 of havoc-making angels. As you would know, the Battle of Badr took place during Ramadan, and this was during the second Ramadan that it took place. Previously there had been skirmishes between Muslims and the unbelievers of Makkah, because the Holy Prophet used to send out scout parties to keep an eye on what was happening. I won't go into the history of Badr. We know that Makkans planned a large attack on Medina, and to raise funds they confiscated Muslim property left behind in Makkah, and Abu Sufyan went to countries close by such as Syria and so on to sell that property to raise funds to buy armaments to attack Medina. The Holy Prophet heard about this, and he decided that as the property that had been sold belonged to the Muslims who had migrated from Medina, this was unjustifiable, and that they will attack this caravan and repossess their possessions, or as the possessions had been sold, take back the money that the kuffar, the unbelievers, had acquired by selling their property. But it's not the historical events that I want to think about today. It is the lessons to be learned from this incident that I want to think about. Those of you who know the Old Testament and so on would know that Battle of Badr was prophesied in Isaiah. If you look at chapter 21, verses 13 to 17, you see a mention of that battle there. I'm not going to read that out. You can look that up for yourself. Now, the first thing that happened was that when scouts came back and told the Holy Prophet that Makkans had gathered a large army, some 1,200 people, to come and defend that caravan, the Holy Prophet, the first thing that the Holy Prophet did was he gathered together the Muslims, and he didn't order them to fight, but he said, advise me. As was the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's habit, to consult people and not to impose his own will or decisions or anything. And we'll come to this in a while. So of course all the people who had come from Makkah were quite happy to say, well, we'll fight. But the reason that the Holy Prophet was concerned was that the treaty that he had with Ansar, or the helpers, the people of Medina who had offered to help the Holy Prophet and the emigrants, that treaty said that we'll defend you if something happened to you in Medina. This was outside Medina. So the Holy Prophet again said, advise me. And when he had repeated this 3 times, Hazrat Saad bin Muad radiyallahu ta'ala anhu stood up and he said, O Prophet of Allah, that it seems that you are alluding to us. We are the ones you want an answer from. And I've printed off a part of his answer. Saad Razulullah Ta'ala said, go where you wish, join whom you wish, and cut off whom you wish. Take what you wish from our property and give us what you wish. What you take from us is dearer than what you leave. Whatever you command, we will follow it. By Allah, if you were to travel until you reached Barke Hamdan, we would be with you. By Allah, if you were to cross this sea, we would plunge into it with our horses. So this was the answer of the leader of the Ansar. But the point I'm making is this. The Holy Prophet consulted them. He didn't impose his will or his opinion on them. There was another leader from the Ansar, from the helpers, called Miqdad, and he said, we do not say to you what the people of Moses said to Moses. This refers to the time when Hazrat Musa alayhi salam led his people out of Egypt and into the promised land. And the promised land had been occupied by others. And God said to them that you will have to fight and evict these people if you want to live in the promised land. And Hazrat Musa's companion said, well, Moses, God promised us this. Now you're telling us we have to fight. So we'll sit here. You and your God go and fight these people. And once you are victorious, then we'll come and take over this land and rule over it. Interestingly, this is not a lot different from what our brothers Sunni Muslims say these days. We don't have to do anything. We'll just sit and wait for the Messiah and the Mahdi to come. And once they've come and they've conquered the whole earth and destroyed all the non-Muslims, and they're dead, we will then happily take over the government of this world. Miqdad went on to say, go forth. We do not say to you what the people of Musa said to Musa. Go forth, you and your Lord, and do battle. We will be waiting here. We will do battle on your right, and we will fight on your left, and we will fight in front of you, and we will fight behind you. But the point I'm making is that the Holy Prophet, despite a treaty with Ansar, he consulted them. He asked them what their interpretation of that treaty was. Because strictly the treaty was about defending the Holy Prophet if he was attacked in Medina. And then the Holy Prophet marched forward. And someone has commented and said that Muslims believe that what happened was a miracle. And this person who's commented upon it is a non-Muslim. And he says, maybe. But in my opinion, it shows Muhammad's military genius. So what the Holy Prophet did was, he marched forward and he occupied the lower part of this valley. And at first what he did was, he occupied took control. There were some wells there for water, and at first he took part of only those wells which were closer to the Muslim army. So another companion of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his name was Hubab radiyallahu anhu. He went up to the Holy Prophet and said, "O Prophet of Allah, this arrangement of the army, is it by divine command or is it your own opinion?" And the Holy Prophet said, "Well, it's not a divine command that has told me to arrange my forces in this way. It is my own personal opinion." So Hubab radiyallahu ta'ala said, "Well, in that case, I have a suggestion." And it was Hubab who suggested that Muslim armies move forward and control all the wells which were needed for people to quench their thirst and so on. Now, I think another reason for the way the Holy Prophet arranged his army and Hubab's suggestion was this, that they knew it was going to rain during the night. And kuffar, the non-believers, they had to climb over a mountain and then come down the other side to get to Badr. And what happened was that because it rained, where the Holy Prophet was, where the earth was loose and so on, it firmed up that part. And when people of Makkah went to arrive at Badr, they had to climb over this mountain which was muddy and which was slippery, and they had difficulty getting over that hill, and it made them very tired when they got over that hill. But in coming to the story, I've forgotten to mention one important aspect of this, which I will mention here now. When the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam set out from Medina, Muslims had 2 horses and 70 or 80 camels. And it was a long way to travel. So of course one way would have been for the owners of the camels to travel on the camels and for everyone else to walk. But it was decided by the Muslims that rides will be shared. 3 people at a time will ride a camel, and then those 3 will get off, and 3 others will get on the camel, and so on and so forth. So everyone got a little bit of rest. When the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam got off the camel because his turn was over, people said, "O Prophet of Allah, you take our turn. You keep riding on the camel." And when they said this, the Holy Prophet said, "Why? Am I not human? Will I not have to answer to my Allah for what I do?" Which was that it wasn't your turn, and you deprived someone else of his right that was due to him. This was how meticulous the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in making sure that every Muslim, whether rich or poor, whether powerful or weak or whatever, they got their right. By setting a personal example that all are equal. I am the head of state, I am the Prophet of Allah, I am the commander of this army, but my turn is over. It is now someone else's turn to ride on this camel. So he got off, and whosever turn it was, they got on the camel and until they arrived in Badr. You see, Muslims, when they say, follow the example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. What do? They say he brushed his teeth with a maswak, so we should throw away our toothbrushes and toothpaste and so on, and we should go and find twigs and so on and brush our teeth with that. Or some other physical thing that you can make a show of. Oh look, why are you doing this? The Holy Prophet did this. But what they fail to do is to derive and act upon the principles that the Holy Prophet had said. When it is said, follow the Sunnah, well, the Sunnah here is that the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam suffered in the same way as the other soldiers who were marching with him to Badr. Now let us look at our own countries. Let us look at Pakistan, for example, where there is shortage of electricity and gas. For 18 hours, electricity is switched off and people are sweltering. But does this happen in those areas of Islamabad where the government is living? Does the President of Pakistan suffer in the same way? Does the Prime Minister of Pakistan suffer in the same way? Do his ministers suffer in the same way? Well, if they don't, then how dare they tell us that they're following the example of the Holy Prophet? This is the example of the Prophet, that he got off his ride and he walked during Ramadan. During Ramadan, under the Arabian sun that blazed out. So when we ask why people embraced Islam, it was this example that made them embrace Islam. When Christians invited Hazrat Umar to come to Jerusalem and take the keys of that city without a fight, this head of state, whose kingdom was much bigger than Saudi Arabia today. He was much more powerful. People asked him for help. He didn't ask anyone else for help. What did he possess? He had one slave and he had one camel. And when people say, follow the example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that great man, that Umar, he followed the example of his master. The slave and the head of state took it in turns to ride on that camel. And when they arrived at Jerusalem, it was the slave's turn to ride the camel, and Hazrat Umar was walking in front of him. People don't follow rhetoric. They follow an example. Someone who does what he says. This is why God says that the worst person is he who says things that he does not. And now look at the discipline of that army. The Holy Prophet lined them up in front of the non-believers. And his instructions were, you are not to move until I tell you. Do you think that's an easy thing to do? When the enemy is firing arrows at you and enemy is throwing spears at you and the enemy is abusing you, do you think it's an easy thing to say, our Commander-in-Chief has said, you stay here in line until I tell you you can attack or you can defend or you can move. And then having lined them, the Holy Prophet then addressed them and said, O people, we do not fight for our own honor. We do not fight for possessions. We do not fight for worldly glory. We fight to establish the unity of Godhead on this earth. This is what jihad is. You fight for the pleasure of Allah to establish His unity on this earth. Not for any other reason, not for worldly glory. And then, when the fight started, who were the first people to go out and confront the enemy? The first person was the Prophet's own son-in-law, Hazrat Ali Radhiyallahu Ta'ala. He sent his own son-in-law out to die first. Do our leaders and commanders-in-chief and generals, do they do that? Or when there's a battle, is their family the first one to find safety and sanctuary? Who was the next person he sent out? Hamza, Radhiyallahu Ta'ala. His uncle. Who was the next person he sent out? Another member of his own clan. He didn't find people who weren't related to him to send them out to go and die for the sake of Allah. He sent out his own kith and kin. He sent out his own brother, his own blood. His own son-in-law. Who sends out their own son-in-law to go and die for the sake of Allah? This is the sunnah we should be following. And then he set out the rules of engagement for the Muslims. You will only fight those who can fight, those who are able to fight. If we fight and we are victorious, as he prayed to God and God told him that he will be, we will not mutilate the dead as was the custom in those days, that you cut off the ears and nose and so on of the enemy that you killed. You will not mutilate the dead. You will treat the dead with respect, whoever they are. For the first time in history, an army that was victorious buried the dead of the opposing force. All those belonging to the non-believers of Makkah who died, they were buried, properly buried, so that their bodies weren't mutilated by dogs and other birds and animals and so on. And he then addressed the prisoners that had been taken, saying, if they could speak, this is those who had died and were buried, they would tell you what I said was true. He then went back to Makkah. And what was the next instruction to the Muslims? You are to treat these captives with due humanity and respect. They will eat what you eat. Of course, to stop them from escaping, the captives were tied up. And Hazrat Ibn Abbas, who was also the Prophet's uncle, was tied up too tightly. And he was groaning with pain. And the Holy Prophet heard that. And he couldn't speak. He couldn't sleep. And people noticed this and they asked him the reason. And he explained that my uncle, Abbas, he's tied up so tightly that he is in pain. And I can hear him groaning and I can't sleep. So the next night, when in the morning, he came out, he asked, what is the matter? I didn't hear Abbas groaning. Notice, he didn't put in a good word for his uncle. He didn't say, although he mentioned his own distress, He didn't say, loosen him. So he asked, I didn't hear a bass groan last night. What has happened? Is he okay? And they said, yes, he's okay. But because it distressed you, we loosened his ties. So what did the Holy Prophet say? He said, this is unfair. Go and loosen the ties of every single prisoner that you have. My uncle won't get any special treatment because he's related to me, and the fact that it distresses me that he's tied up too tight. If you've loosened him, do the same to everyone. So when you say, what made Islam great? But these actions and these things. And all these prisoners, they were released for ransom. Not the sort of ransom that the British and the French demanded of the Germans at the end of First World War, which drove people into poverty and starvation and hunger and led to the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. But what those people could afford. And some of them said, we are too poor. We can't afford to give you any money. So what did the Prophet of Allah do? He said, okay, that's not a problem. People of Makkah can mostly read and write. Because they were traders, they had to travel to other countries. And so they needed to keep accounts and be able to talk to people. So they said, okay, each one of you should teach 10 Muslims to read and write. In 3 months, Medina, that had 15 people who were educated, had 815 people who were educated in the sense that they could read and write. This is how much importance the Holy Prophet paid to reading and writing. Let me tell you before I finish, one thing, one sunnat of the Holy Prophet, which our Jamaat revived. He asked one of his companions to learn Hebrew. He asked another one of his companions to learn Persian, so that they could go and they could preach to these people. And they could read their holy books and see what was written in them and discuss with them the truth of Islam. And it's after 1400 years or 1500 years that our Jamaat revived that tradition. And we had people like Maulana Yusuf Granthi, who learned another language and translated the Holy Quran. We had people like Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Nazirul Islam, who went to Germany and who learned German and established a mission. We had people like Maulana Abdul Haq Vidyarthi, who learned Sanskrit and Hebrew and many other languages to be able to read their holy scriptures and see what they say. In 1400 years before the advent of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salam, not a single Muslim group made it their mission to learn other languages, to go and propagate Islam to the people of that country. This is the sunnah of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. You can write encyclopedias the size of Encyclopedia Britannica, taking every little incident in his life and exploring it and seeing what principles we can derive from that to implement in our own lives, not just personally and individually, which is generally what people take it to mean, but also collectively, as nations, as Muslims, and then see whether Islam again prevails over all other religions and all other people or not. It is our conduct which will propagate Islam, not just translations and writing of books and distributing them and so on.